Three friends boarded Disney's Galactic Starcruiser to seek their destiny and emerged as heroes of the Halcyon. Hello and welcome to Heroes of the Halcyon, the best, and to the best of our knowledge, only Galactic Starcruiser Superfan podcast on the interwebs. I'm Galactic Starcruiser Superfan Drew, and with me are...
Superfan Christine.
And Superfan Martin. Well, we've got a great guest this week, and we're not going to just talk about Galactic Starcruiser. We're going to talk about immersive experiences as a whole, how they kind of introduce people via marketing, how they onboard people into the experience, how they kind of walk them through the lore. And there's nobody better to talk to with this than immersive designer Nick Tierce. We welcome Nick back onto the show.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. When we thought of this show topic when we were on Voyage number 2, we immediately said, we got to see if Nick's available. So I'm super excited that you're able to join us tonight.
I'm so honored to be back, and so soon after my first visit. It's a real pleasure to talk with fellow superfans of the Galactic Starcruiser.
So you've been busy. You had just finished producing Hollow Medium just before your last episode, and obviously it's been released. The audio drama that you can find on the web, you can find it on podcast servers everywhere. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yes, you asked me to come on at just the right time, because now I am free from the shackles, the very fun and delightful shackles, of course, of releasing Hollow Medium, which we did every Sunday throughout October as a little Halloween treat for folks. And now it lives on in perpetuity. So anyone who wants to uncover some of the secrets that I will say now have yet to be uncovered, many have been. The researchers and audience members who have been listening so far have found some amazing things about Hollow Medium, but there are still those yet uncovered. So I encourage anyone, if you just want to start with the show, it's easy enough to listen to anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just type in Hollow Medium. Or if you want to take a deep, deep dive, there are some ancillary artifacts on hollowmedium.com that you are welcome to dig through. We found a treasure trove in this antique steamer trunk, and all we're doing is sharing it with the world. Of course, that's the fiction of it. We made everything meticulously, but...
So what was the genesis of that project?
My wife had this idea a couple years ago as our pandemic project, and it just snowballed and snowballed and snowballed until it became this thing that was much larger than we could have imagined. And now that all 5 episodes are out and you listen to them in a row, it's just about the length of a feature film. So, you can sit down if you want to binge it or just dole them out one at a time, because I do recommend taking them one episode at a time and then seeing, what sort of stuff is on the website associated with that episode, because there is a bit of a progression to those things. But yeah, that was just a little thing that we thought, this will be easy. One performer, audio diaries, 1926. Turns out that last bit is a lot harder to achieve than I thought it would be. And three sound designers later, we finally found one that understood the concept and really helped us make it sound like it was an artifact of times gone by, rather than just like, sort of a modern audio drama. Even though it functions as that dramatically, we wanted it to sound more like an in-universe, diegetic artifact. And that's a tricky thing to balance between understanding what the character is saying and believing it could be embedded on a wax cylinder. So finding that kind of artistic balance was always a challenge going through it. But the excitement of the sort of framing device that we had kept us going all that time. And now I'm just glad that it's out there forever for folks to stumble onto and keep the spooky season going as long as you like.
Well, I have to tell you that I didn't know that it was possible to have an audio jump scare, but now I know that it's possible. I know that it's possible.
Hopefully not too many. It's more, I'd say in general, it's more atmospheric. But,
Yes.
Naturally speaking, because you can't see things coming,
right,
there will be a few things that take the character as much as yourself by surprise.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what happened to me and my son. And those crickets that we just bought at the pet store were also quite surprised. So that was pretty good. Well, speaking of interactive and entertainment in general, one of the things we wanted to chat about was when we were on the Starcruiser, we had an experience. Martin, why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, the second cruise we had, fantastic, absolutely sensational for us. But on the last night, we were sitting in the Sublight Lounge just speaking with a bunch of the passengers about their experiences. And one couple in particular kind of had a unique story that they were enjoying themselves. The wife had actually purchased this trip as a surprise for the husband, had not told him how much it cost. And
it was very strategic.
That was a very strategically mentioned. But although they were having fun, they definitely had a sense that a lot of things had kind of passed them by, that they kind of fell in the cracks, that they saw, people like us that really knew the system, a lot of things happening to them and for them. And at the end, they did actually express a little bit of disappointment that they didn't feel like they had the full experience. And
they hadn't seen much of the interactivity. They kind of did a little bit of the game. They saw obviously the show in the atrium and the various aspects that are pretty, but they missed what makes Starcruiser.
The shoulder tap moments and whatnot. And again, it's such a complex system that it was just kind of an interesting thing to talk about. What could Disney do about this issue to kind of, make it a more cohesive thing for everybody?
Certainly. And I think that when we talk about bringing people into an experience that's never existed before, it's half about the design of the experience, which I think all of us assembled here can agree is beyond reproach and absolutely does all of the things we would hope it to do. And certainly so many designers take inspiration from the video game world and the idea of the Nintendo or the Mario model of the first level is the tutorial, meaning by ship's muster, you should know how to play. You should know who the characters are. And I do think that generally speaking, Starcruiser does work pretty well in that sense. The other half of the equation that plagues a project like this is the marketing, the advertising. How do you not only convince people to buy a ticket and go, but then between that moment of the ticket purchase and arrival, prepare them to most fully enjoy the experience that they're going to have. And it's exponentially complex with an experience like this because it can exist on so many levels. There are those of us who really want to dive in. And let's be honest, nothing's going to stop us from doing that. So it doesn't matter. For us, it doesn't matter what kind of onboarding there is. Now, that being said, there's also the other side of that scale, which is not necessarily the couple you were talking about having a conversation with, but even further down where if they had that same experience that couple had, I'm just going to watch, I'm just going to enjoy, I'm going to see some amazing things, they wouldn't have walked away disappointed. So your level of no expectation, you kind of don't have to onboard for them either. It's those people in the middle who don't know what they don't know, who then only know the shape of it after the experience. Yeah. And ultimately, that onboarding experience, however you want to assess that it exists at the current time, failed them in particular. Because yes, they probably did have a taste of this and a taste of that. But because so much of their experience, I assume, was spent trying to figure out how and what it was, they fell through the cracks, as you say. And that does happen sometimes. And it's one of those things you can't fully design against. But obviously, there are always ways to make sure that folks who would want to dive in have the resources and the knowledge they have to do it, because at least on my own estimation, the current onboarding for Starcruiser, particularly pre-arrival, is almost non-existent. The information contained in the emails that are sent to you in advance don't really do any of the things that we're talking about. And certainly the marketing, we've talked about that frequently, the nature of the marketing, both just the tone of it from the beginning and also how they've pivoted it over the time. And I'm now seeing, sponsored ads for Starcruiser on Facebook that literally use the tagline, "Sit back and relax to enjoy your Star Wars story," which is a deeply confusing sentence. I mean, if your Star Wars story is sit back and relax, that's absolutely true. But
great, sure.
But I would think it's more aptly sit back and relax and enjoy someone else's Star Wars story. But I do think about that because I am of the opinion that there are ways to establish both sides of the experience before you get there, which is to say there's the narrative component, which is when am I, where am I, who are all these people, what's going on, what's the prequel to this, right? Not everyone is going to read that comic book. In fact, I don't think there is, unless they've changed it in the ensuing months. I don't believe there's anything in the Starcruiser emails that tells you that there is a prequel.
Nope,
comic
nothing.
book.
Haven't seen anything.
So that's, there is also all this wealth of literature surrounding Galaxy's Edge that sort of, is interesting to know. Now, that being said, clearly the Starcruiser experience is designed for someone who has not been to Galaxy's Edge. So that's not necessarily information you would want to push ahead. But with the lore, even just that they've created around Chandrila Starline and the individual characters that you meet when you get there, I can certainly imagine a future where you have a campaign that is focused either from advertising perspective or onboarding for people once they've bought a ticket, that focuses on familiarizing you with what these characters have been up to before you meet them.
Sure.
Because I don't personally believe that would be a detriment to your experience necessarily, to know who some of these people are. Now, an email that lists out who they are is one thing, but what have they been up to? You know, what is the history of the ship and the Starline itself and all the founders. Now, I know some of that is covered in like the ship's tour that you get, but to me, that's just enrichment and it doesn't have to be something that you are obligated to go through, but having that information available in a compelling way for folks before they get there, I think could do nothing but raise their anticipation and make them really feel already connected, because that's what this is all about, right? Connecting people both with the story they're experiencing and their fellow passengers, and making them able to sort of be a fan before they even arrive. In my mind, that would just be a wonderful way to handle the narrative side of it. Because the other part is the functional, which is how do I play?
Right.
Because, you know, even if you had told that couple who those people were, they wouldn't necessarily know I should go up and talk to these people. But as we've observed, you know, the four of us assembled, having the honor of having gone a couple times on Starcruiser, you know, there are these pocketed windows of opportunity where you really should talk to the characters as much as humanly possible. And I don't know that the importance of that is really impressed. Now, you can't impress it too much, because then you make people feel as though it's obligated, because then you kind of make people who don't want to do all that feel like you have to, which of course nothing on the ship is you have to do it. You can absolutely spend your whole 2 days in the Sublight Lounge and you'll have a great time. But having information there for people who do want more, to have that slight, I'm just not sure. Because, you know, honestly, it took me a couple times to realize, oh, I see that you can jumpstart certain invitations before muster. And then I thought, well, isn't it natural to assume I could jumpstart all the other invitations as well? And the truth is, no, there's really just that one that you can do. And so if you come into Starcruiser with, you know, a certain degree of aiming for a particular outcome, which is not necessarily a mentality that I recommend to anyone going into Starcruiser with, that is an element of the functionality that I think onboarding could help with, which is I do think some people will come onto Starcruiser with an expectation of how does this work? There are certain words that the fans use to describe Starcruiser, which the designers of Starcruiser have never used in any of their presentations, particularly words like path and track. And so those words, the idea of a linearity to getting onto one rail or another, tends to permeate people who have done their own research and, for want of any official information, have turned to fan assumptions about how these things work. And so they come in with an aim, not realizing that the mechanics might not necessarily be designed to get you into the story in that way, right? And so the idea of priming people's expectations, not just narratively, but functionally, the idea that you can't be sure what adventure you'll have, but you can know that the adventure you'll have will be yours alone. And the idea that what you see might not be what you thought you would see, but it will be exclusively yours. This idea of there is introducing that idea of the simultaneity, which is one of those great aha moments when you're there, which is, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. There's things happening at the same time all over the ship, but I'm seeing what I'm seeing. You know, that I'm going to have to compare notes with other guests. And that idea of communally assembling the story functionally is an interesting new concept for a lot of people. And I'm not here to pitch specific marketing language, but the idea of introducing those kind of concepts of how is this thing actually shaped, you know, not to the degree that you have to give away all the secrets of how it was made, but just in the generality sense of talk to characters, scan your badge, you know, this type of thing. You know, what are the basic sort of rules of engagement? That would be, I think, a wonderful thing to introduce people to right up front, particularly once you've already got them. I'm not saying that this is marketing ad copy, but once they have a ticket, and they don't have to read it if they don't want to, but to say, if you'd like information on how to kickstart your journey once you've arrived, click over here. We have some resources available for you, that kind of thing. You know, it is a bit sort of like, the only information out there is kind of the marketing stuff. But once you've already got me, You're not selling the experience to me. It's more about priming me to have the best time once I get there.
When you check into your room, they have that little flyer inside the room about, talk to people, scan them, but nobody, I just need to tell Disney or anyone else that's listening, people are so excited when they get into their room, they're not going to read any literature whatsoever.
Absolutely. I don't want homework. I don't want immediate homework that, I looked at that first time I got there and I saw that. I know exactly the slip of paper you're talking about that basically breaks down a couple of things we're saying. And I'm like, ooh, this would have been nice to have.
Right.
Before I got here.
Right.
Yeah.
An interesting thing is, I remember in our first voyage, and I'm kind of curious, Nick, to see if you got this, we got an email, at least I got an email that said, what was my desired level of interaction? I don't remember getting that email the second voyage.
And that's also about setting expectations, because I think probably the reason they stopped sending that email is when you ask someone that question, you assume as the person being asked that there will be accommodations to that request, when really I think that was more of a survey type situation where they just wanted the data. But I will admit, having seen that, yes, I did get that email. There was that assumption of, and it even kind of colored my assumption of those first couple data pad interactions, because I believe the last time we talked, we may have discussed that first text chat with Lenka Mock that you have in the data pad, and kind of assuming that would be my way of communicating to the experience what I'm interested in doing, when actually it was more of a hint system going in my direction to tell me who to talk to, and I just did not realize that's what that was trying to do. So there is that, I think, assumption that folks have, which is, I see the data pad exists, I see that there are these surveys. It does get this idea into your head that there's like a buffet aspect of I can tell them what I want, and at least from where I'm sitting at this point, having studied it, it doesn't seem like it's actually built that way.
Right. No, it doesn't.
Well, plus I think too, if you have that kind of survey that you put out to somebody and they respond as they are today, that doesn't really give them the opportunity to go beyond where they're at today. I go back again to my own experience of not having done anything like this before, or cosplay or anything else. If I had seen some of this information prior to going, and it may have flipped that switch sooner as to, okay, so it's not going to be so, scary to talk to people whenever I get there. I can interact, and if I don't know exactly what to say, that's okay. It's just they're going to help you along the way.
Right. And thankfully, that's the one part of this we don't have to worry about, because obviously it can, out of context, this conversation can sound a bit nitpicky because we're not actually talking about the thing, which is to say Starcruiser, the experience. Those performers are trained so beautifully to know how to engage with people on different levels of engagement, and to not assume based on their outward expression which level that they're on, mm-hmm. and knowing that there are ways to engage subtly and gradually with seemingly shy people, and to wrap them into the story in a way that they know is comforting to them and doesn't infringe on whatever assumption you might make about where they're at with the story, why they're there, why they're doing what they're interested in. So the actual implementation part of once you're there, how to interact, that part no one has to worry about. It's been so beautifully designed. It's just what we're talking about. It's that bit right before it, right?
Yep,
it's that because there's, one thing that we just have to be honest about is, for most people who visit Starcruiser, rightly so, this is an aspirational, once in a lifetime expense for them. And when something is once in a lifetime, oh gosh, I'm going to save for years to come to Starcruiser, and this is a one-time thing. The stakes in your mind are so high for every interaction that there is, I got a little anxiety out of it myself, even the thought of, wow, I understand that theoretically there is a choice being presented to me right now. But in a situation where, wow, this is once in a lifetime thing, there is an enhanced cost to saying no. And I almost felt like I had to say yes to everything simply because I wanted to get the most out of it. But truthfully, that's a difficult thing to design around, which is, what is the cost of saying no in an experience that is truly once in a lifetime? And how do we, understand that there will be people who might even be on the other side of this coin more prone to saying yes just because, oh my, I really fear of missing out, right?
Yeah, FOMO is that was, like I've said before, that first cruise, that first day, I was like, oh my gosh, if I make the wrong choice, I'm going to screw it up, and I'm not going to get the path that again, path is my word. I'm not going to get this thing that I want to do, and so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Well,
absolutely. And I can't blame you for using the word path, because it's for want of describing it any other way, right? Mm-hmm. And honestly, it's less cumbersome than even my attempt to make any substitutions, which is simply, I tend to say invitations and opportunities, which is when I ask people, I've recently met a couple people who went on Starcruiser and I didn't realize, and we caught up about it, and the way I kind of phrased it to them was, what invitations did you get near the end?
Nice. Yeah.
Where did you find yourself before the finale? This kind of thing, that kind of thing. Because really, the structure, and this might be going a little off topic, so feel free to confine me to the cutting room floor here. but the more I think about Starcruiser, and this does tie into onboarding a little bit because it's all about expectations, but this idea of what is the actual shape of it, and the mechanics that are powering this thing, and the elegance of it, and why it's so effective is, while they're not necessarily linear paths, obviously structurally it's a node-based structure. There's all these nodes of opportunity for you to have this very complex profile with a lot of different statistics that are associated with your player profile. It's all about you getting an ending that makes sense with how you began. It's all about getting a set of invitations that are payoffs to the setups that you intuitively experience. Meaning, if at all possible, now obviously the system will simply not have enough data about certain players to necessarily do it. But for those who are engaged, the idea of saying they know who you've spent the most time with, they know what characters you have connected with, we must make sure that we end the experience for them to see and understand things that they experienced prior. Knowing that information and having a digital backend that lets them surface those invitations, that's the beauty of it. And so it's a lot more complex than just saying, I'm on the Jedi path, which particularly if we're ranking, in this hypothetical world where we're using the term paths, I would say, you might be able to call your affiliation a path, but I would just say, which are you helping the good guys or the bad guys? That's your affiliation. But those, specifically with the Resistance, there are 4 or 5 characters that you can potentially have different quests from and organize things around in that way. First Order obviously is more the Lieutenant Croy fan club, but that makes sense in terms of the distribution of players generally, I think. But, even so beneath that, there are these sub-opportunities that you can pair with those initial affiliations. And then I think beneath that, there is even this third level. And within that third level kind of exists the force opportunities, right? And certainly it seems like there might be new ways for them. I haven't confirmed any of the sort of fan rumors around what this new Path of the Saja presentation goes into. I don't actually know how that works or what the content is, but if you think I'm not searching YouTube every day hoping someone uploads it, you don't know.
Well, even just from a broad stroke, something that I was really, really surprised. I made what ended up being a terrible assumption, going into Starcruiser, that the vast majority of people on Starcruiser will have already been to Galaxy's Edge. I assumed that. And I just said, you'd go to Galaxy's Edge and then you'd invest in, this second tier experience. And I found that a lot of people that go on Starcruiser have not been to Galaxy's Edge. And again, that's something that, it's a challenge designed for that, is that Disney knows who's been to Galaxy's Edge. They can look at our, Play Disney and know we've been to Galaxy's Edge. We know how all of this works, and they know who hasn't. And that's another layer that they just can't programmatically adjust for. Who's been there, who hasn't been there.
You mean do something instead of go to Batu, or are you saying?
No, just there could be, they could make a second layer of, a complexity for people that have been to Batu.
I see. Okay.
Which is just kind of an interesting thing. But again, then we just get into a whole different can of worms. But
yes,
it's just kind of interesting that Disney's got all of these data points as to who knows what before they even step on Starcruiser, and I'm not sure how many of those they use or don't use. Or
I don't think they're using any. And quite frankly, it just gets down to a question of they certainly have more data points than they can do with, specifically just in terms of budget, which is just the question of they could design something for people that have already been to Galaxy's Edge, but the cost versus the return in terms of how much would it take in both effort and resources to produce it versus how many people will it pay off for. And it just doesn't really win in that equation when you run that calculation. It never will. But obviously I fell into that because I observed the same thing, which is I think there are probably more people right now at this point in time that are doing Starcruiser that have already been to Galaxy's Edge than they designed for, which is to say they designed it as if you've never been, which is of course, they design as if you don't know anything about it, which to me makes for kind of a difficult second act, which is to say the designers, when they do presentations on Starcruiser, talk about it in 3 acts. Your first stage, your first act, the sort of excursion is the second act, and then that evening is your third act finale, right? And it's one of those things where certainly if you've never engaged with the data pad, there's this whole new layer over Galaxy's Edge. Wow, that's amazing. For those of us who have, certainly I was doing a speed run. There's no question. I was trying to get back to that ship to smell that atrium once more. But, that it's one of those things where I acknowledge that it would have been probably a bigger headache than it was worth to design for people like me. And that need will probably taper off, I assume, as we continue forward, which is to say, Starcruiser has to exist for a long time, and it will become this thing where it's like, it is the ultimate package for if you want the Disney World Star Wars experience. Now, would I love it if they just added a couple alternate missions that kept me on the ship? Yes, of course. I've gone on record. I would love that, but I understand why it's not there, and it's certainly not going to tarnish my vision of what this thing is and kind of the reputation in my own head of the amazing innovations that it puts forth. But it wouldn't be necessarily in the Star Wars legacy if there wasn't part of it that had, to some people, a soggy second act.
Yes.
So let's jump off Starcruiser for just a little bit, and let's talk about some other interactive entertainment experiences and how they have handled the onboarding, the marketing, things like that. Let's start with Sleep No More.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Sleep No More, and because we haven't been and you have,
we're mildly obsessed.
how they take care of this challenge.
I trust that you will all eventually visit Sleep No More. They're not going anywhere. Sleep No More owns the building that they're in. They don't have to worry about silly things such as rent as the rest of us do. But it's an apt comparison because there are members of the Starcruiser creative team who worked on Sleep No More.
Okay.
And it is part of the legacy of all immersive. It's kind of the elephant in the room you can't not talk about, even if it is capital I immersive and not exactly capital I interactive, which is to say Starcruiser is an interactive experience. Sleep No More is immersive, but it is decidedly non-interactive, which is to say it is a non-proscenium theater experience unless you consider that when they hand you a mask to put on, all the audience must wear masks as they wander around the story. It's simply making the fourth wall your eyes. So this mask is the proscenium archway, and you're observing a story, and you might be pulled into it for lightly interactive moments. However, it would be difficult to call the whole experience interactive because most people will not be pulled into those one-on-one experiences, as they call them, the one-on-one scenes. It is a vast building, 90 plus rooms that you can explore as the show is happening simultaneously all around it. It is larger in scale than Starcruiser, but that level of simultaneity is very similar. And it gave me that very same feeling of, oh, I love this idea that I'm seeing something here and my wife has run off and watched another scene in another room and we'll go off to the bar afterwards and compare notes. Very similar to Starcruiser. Now, in terms of onboarding and marketing, it's interesting because especially in the early days, it's been going on over 10 years now, I think, it was all word of mouth.
Okay.
And certainly a lot of, I think, what brings people into Starcruiser, whether you consider that influencers or friends, is word of mouth based, which is to say the marketing, while being perhaps a little bit negligent, has left most of the work of describing what this thing is to the people like us telling people what it is.
Well, and
so
in fact,
that way, it's wonderful.
And sorry to interrupt you, Nick. It just occurs to me, a lot of our audience might not even know what Sleep No More is. Can you describe a little bit about what Sleep No More is?
Absolutely. So Sleep No More is an immersive theater production that expresses its story mostly through dance and sort of nonverbal scenes. There is a little bit of speaking, but it is mostly nonverbal. And it is technically an adaptation of Macbeth. However, it is not billed as a narrative experience. It is very sort of atmospheric. It is very sort of tone based, and it takes more aesthetic inspiration from like Alfred Hitchcock film noir, and it's creating a very tense adult universe for you to exist in throughout these 90 plus rooms over 5 stories that you can explore freely. And it's difficult to describe the story specifically because truthfully, it is not a narrative experience. I mean, you can, if you are very familiar with the Bard, pick up on some of the inspiration, but it is much more of, let's borrow a George Lucas word, a tone poem.
Okay.
Much more of a tone poem than anything. And you can be, as an audience member, moving around with your little mask on, pulled into these one-on-one scenes where an actor might approach you, select you, and pull you into a room and lock the door so it's just the two of you. And over the decades, I shouldn't say decades, over the time that this thing has existed, the near decade that it has existed, some super fans have gamified that in a way which I've been to Sleep No More 5 or 6 times, and it became over the years a little bit more difficult to enjoy because there were people elbowing me out of the way trying to get to a one-on-one. And so that's always been the challenge of that. But the onboarding on site for that type of experience is very well done. Okay. You are very clear on what you can and can't do. And honestly, that mask is such an intuitive piece because if an actor wants to interact with you, they will take it off of your face and they will put it on when you're done. The rules are very clear. They explain it to you right when you're on site, when you're checking in, because you'll check, a couple hundred people can do it, but they check you in groups of 10 or 15 or whatever it is. And so, it's very personalized. It's very much, and there's no confusion, I don't think, by anyone. Because, it's very mysterious until you get there if you haven't talked to someone about it or you haven't watched one of the television shows that by this point Sleep No More has been featured on. But it really is one of those things where the design of it kind of tells you how to interact with it. And I do think a lot of that has carried over to Starcruiser, where it's like, to a certain degree, outside of the nuance of how do I get to a certain place? How do I do a certain thing? Just, the impetus to interact with the characters in Starcruiser, I think, should be fairly intuitive after you get to muster, right? Like that, by that point, they're kind of mulling about. You really have a sense of who's part of what faction. And that's one of those things where I think the legacy of that decision is not right for every sort of show, but certainly to me seems to be appropriate to Starcruiser. And we certainly are in an age where the marketing part of it is still word of mouth. So very much, very much in that Sleep No More legacy. So I'd say it's alive and well up in space as well as it is in New York City.
so you before I interrupted you were saying that the word of mouth experience was, basically people said they told people about it. They heard about the experience from other people who had seen the show. Was there any type of marketing so that when you saw it, did it say an interactive narrative or an immersive narrative or something?
Absolutely. I mean, they didn't have that language at the time, but I couldn't quote you the exact copy, but I do know that even to now, if you look at the marketing they have now is not dissimilar from the marketing that at least I personally remember from the time that I went to see it, which is they kind of did play their cards close to their chest. And because it is ostensibly a mystery experience, they kept the marketing very tonal, very mysterious, very sort of, this is the type of world you go into. But there was always any question you had in terms of safety or function, it was on there. There was a FAQ that you could look at and kind of get some more information, particularly about the logistics of it. But no, they kept it fairly close to the chest. And then again, being a non-narrative experience, there isn't that kind of narrative onboarding for you to do because it is more an experience of discovery than anything else. And they did preserve that. But no, so it was very much just getting people into what is this going to feel like? Okay. And making sure that the website was very sort of in universe because the name of the building is fictional itself, the McKittrick Hotel. They all of your communications and your tickets come from the McKittrick Hotel. That's cool. And so they let it bleed out in that way to set people's expectations. But yeah, it was definitely playing on the inherent mystery of that experience.
How did you hear about it back in the day?
I was already at the time vaguely interested in the whole immersive theater scene. And even at that point, it was kind of like, this is the juggernaut. This is the big budget thing that you must do. So certainly the very next chance, I didn't take a trip specifically for it, but when I found myself in New York, whenever next I was there, I made it an absolute priority. And then I think the next 4 or 5 times I went, I made sure it was, no matter why I was there, I said, let's see if there's any availability.
Let's just stop by.
Yeah, just stop by. Yeah.
Well, one of the first immersive theater experiences, and if the immersive theater is excessive compared to Sleep No More, but I remember, I think I first read about Delusion in Los Angeles.
Yes.
Man, I think that was probably 6 or 7 years ago. I think you're familiar with Delusion, Nick?
Yes, I've been to 3 of their productions, including this year's, which is kind of under new management in a way, and they have a wonderful venue out here in Pomona, California. And it's a historic building that they've used for their immersive purposes. And that one is billed explicitly as interactive. I don't know if they began that way, because this has been an ongoing sort of serialized narrative with a different kind of theme progressing it every year. This year's theme is 1960s cult families.
Nice.
And so appropriate for Los Angeles. But it explicitly calls itself interactive. And obviously interactive is a large word. It can mean many things. But they also are tending to be cinematic more than theatrical, even though clearly it's a physical thing. There are actors. It is a theatrical production, no question. But the attempt is to create a series of escalating cinematic level quality vignettes that you can play a role in. Certain people may be pulled in to do specific things in specific moments. You might be asked to hide under a bed or to fire a shotgun or do this, that, or the other. And I would think of it more like, okay, there's a story happening, and there will be these moments when I can sort of touch it. There is not the kind of overarching interactivity that we associate with a Starcruiser type experience. But then again, it is a show. It's a one night, you're there for an hour and a half or so. Last year's did have what they called the open world component, which was to say before or after you experience the production, there was kind of the lobby that had a series of puzzles that you could unlock. They didn't do that this year, and I don't know if that's something they will do continuing forward. And quite frankly, it's not necessarily priming you for the type of interactivity that you would do in the thing. So I completely understand why they didn't do that this year, other than just obviously it's hard to design puzzles, and I get it. But that one is the type of thing where they're doing more traditional haunt marketing. Okay. They're doing and they'll show you what it is. They really do. They give you an example, because they have footage from previous years that they can use without really spoiling you on this one so much.
Oh, that's a good point. Sure.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where you really can just kind of tell people what to expect, and it's not going to get to give away everything. And certainly, even if you did tell people, because I'm all about giving people the information they need to feel comfortable and not anxious, and know what's coming, so that, look, I can tell you beat for beat what happens. We're in the realm of the embodied experience. That's kind of the other word people are using other than immersive nowadays, the embodied experience, which is to say your body is the medium, right?
Yeah,
and so
right.
There's nothing I can tell you that I can say a monster walked down the hallway.
Okay.
That has nothing to do with the feeling of standing in a hallway and having a monster walking at you,
Right,
like that. And it is an intuitive, emotional feeling in that moment. And I do know that Delusion has had over the years some criticisms about safety and how they're running it. But I also know that they're now part of a larger company, and they've had new folks come on the team who are really operationally minded and really have safety as their number one priority. So I think it's one of those things where they receive the criticism, and I'd like to think that, at least from the outside, it seems like they're acknowledging it. But it's a fascinating type of production, and because it is so involving of the audience, they do seem to want you to know what you're getting into.
Well, and that's why I brought this up specifically before we talk about some of the other interactive experiences today. But when I first saw it, I think it was maybe in its second or third year. It was very early on, and I immediately saw it. And I said, "Oh, I need to do this." And of course, I never did, because I'm me. And next year, there's always next year. Yeah, but what I distinctly remember from the marketing at the beginning was it very much sold to me the immersion of the experience and the interactivity. That was it was one of the first experiences I distinctly remember going, oh, they're really trying to make Westworld happen for real. And so that's why I'm not, I with Starcruiser, we knew because we were going to know, we were going to find out everything we could because that's the way we are. But for this poor couple, and I don't know if you listen to the show, but thank you if you do. But for this poor couple, they clearly didn't, and so I wonder if the Starcruiser experience would benefit from some of the advertising of the immersive or interactive experiences a little bit more, similar to how Delusion did, or maybe some of the other ones we want to talk about.
Well, it's an interesting thing because to wrap up the Delusion point specifically, it might actually be a counterexample to the dangers of doing the type of thing we're talking about and why it's such a nuanced thing, because even just in how you described it, I was like, yeah, that's not really Delusion. I mean, in a sense, specifically comparing it to the two things we talked about so far, Starcruiser and Sleep No More, which is to say there are great structural similarities between Starcruiser and Sleep No More in terms of the simultaneity, multiple room scenes going on. Delusion is a strictly linear experience. It is a show. Scene A, scene B, scene D. You're being guided through it.
Gotcha.
You're more of a passenger in that sense. It has an element of a dark ride in that sense, but you're walking, obviously. There are these tableaus that will occur around you, and it's a fun haunt thing to do, absolutely. But it does not have that kind of emergent play that you would associate with something where there is a space for you to explore, where there is, guided by your own curiosity. Delusion does not truthfully allow for that. And rightly so. It's not the type of thing it's being designed for. But like you said, you invoke that interactive word and it gives you visions of that. Absolutely. But because I think Starcruiser can fulfill it, I would say they're even more deserving of using that word in their onboarding because it is something they can fulfill. But there's been some folks in the immersive and interactive community that have put forth the idea of not only a rating system, but an experience description system that could be standardized for these type of things. Now, obviously, Disney might not be apt to opt to use something like that, but particularly for these independent projects, to not just say what level of person age is appropriate for, but also what type of, when you say interactive, what do you mean? Let's have a standardized system. What is my role? How much can I do? And the idea of across the industry really standardizing it, I support their efforts, and I think it's a great idea because it's always more fun to know what you're getting into. And to say, I don't have to poke around and feel like an idiot if I go too far. That kind of thing. Because there's always that fear, which is like, I really want to dig in, but at the beginning, I need to make sure I'm not going to be, I don't want to be a bad patron. I want to be supportive in the way they've designed for it to be supportive.
I actually fully support that idea because to me, it actually frees up an experience to really go there. Whereas if they're not warning people ahead of time and they kind of have to cater to a broader, expectation, that they can't go as far in certain, areas of the experience. Where here, if they're telling you it's going to be this, they could really dive for that.
Instead of just an interactive experience, it's an extreme interactive experience.
It's a level 10.
but another experience, again, we're going to stay in California here, but Knott's Berry Farm has this experience, Ghost Town Alive. That does, have more of like the shoulder tap moments.
It definitely direct shared DNA with Starcruiser, no question, because some of those experiments that led up to Starcruiser splintered off, and some of those people, those Imagineers, went over to Knott's and made that experience. So it is a type of thing where they are carrying on that legacy in a way that Disney kind of can't right now, outside of Starcruiser, I mean. Certainly having this Starcruiser-esque experience going on every summer, they have different challenges than you do in a more controlled space with a fixed number of guests. But they really, particularly being in Southern California and seeing what the marketing for Ghost Town Alive looks like when the summer rolls around, they have based that marketing campaign on the interactive element, particularly for children. I mean, obviously, adults can play just as well. But how do you sell the experience? I'll go to a drive-through at, a fast food restaurant, and there'll be a little poster on the drive-through about Ghost Town Alive. I will exit Universal Studios, and there's a giant billboard for Ghost Town Alive. It's one of their signature experiences for Knott's Berry Farm, particularly during that season of the year, and rightly so, to focus on, just this iconic image of their cowboy handing something to the little cowboy who's come to the park. It goes to show we're welcoming you in like a bear hug. And that has been the tonality of their marketing, which is, come on in and join the town. Who knows what you could get into, that kind of thing. And it really focuses on that element more than anything.
How do they bring people on board when they come into Knott's Berry Farm? How do they bring people into that experience?
Well, just stepping back for
completely
a moment,
opt in, yeah.
Let's actually let's explain what Ghost Town Alive even is.
Oh, sure, good point. Yeah.
So Ghost Town Alive is the spiritual successor to the Legends of Frontierland experience that happened at Disneyland. And it is a living ghost town because one of the central core historic parts of Knott's Berry Farm is their ghost town, their Calico ghost town. And it's always been there. It's a central part of the park. And this experience allows it to come alive with a fully populated town of characters played by the greatest immersive theme park actors you could hope for. And it's just a vast, vast cast with so many different types of ways for you to engage with it that truthfully, it feels like a living town. It really goes so far to bring it alive. And in terms of scale, it's got a larger cast than something like Starcruiser is. It might not be as tightly scripted as something like Starcruiser is, but it has a lot more sort of opportunities for that emergent play that we love. Those little moments in the atrium when you're shuffling Chewbacca and hiding him from the First Order or whatever you're doing in the atrium.
Right.
Those types of things are the bread and butter of something like Ghost Town Alive. And there is truly no traditional onboarding. It truly all rests on the performers because you can't throw a stone without hitting one in that land.
Okay.
So strike up a conversation and you might be able to help the bank teller. You might be able to help the guy who's running the newspaper. You might join the Mayfield gang. And there's just a wonderful level of immersion because, as I've said before, and I'll describe again, just for anyone hearing this idea for the first time, one thing I love about it, which is sort of singular at this point, is they don't do double casting. And I will always praise this idea, which is to say, oh, maybe there's 5 Mayfield brothers, but only 2 of them will be there at a time. That way, if you know Bob Mayfield, that actor's face is always that character.
Okay.
And if he's not working that day, well, Bob's off doing something on the trail. And today we got Jess Mayfield. So there will always be someone to fulfill the role of that character.
Okay.
But the actual identity of that character is linked inextricably to the actor.
Okay.
And it is so wonderful to do that because generally you can't do that. It's, there aren't necessarily every single theme that you could explore in an experience like this that would be complementary to that kind of structure. But the fact that they have this and they have the ability to let these actors really own these characters, it's a really unique and special thing. And I recommend anyone interested in this kind of Starcruiser immersion, treat yourself next summer when it comes back because it's not something to be missed. And it kind of happens all day. You can pop in and pop out as much as you want. You can go ride a roller coaster if you like and come back and get into a different thing. Maybe they're voting for the new mayor. Maybe they're trying to find a hidden buried treasure or something like this. There's always some different thing going on. And it's really wonderful. And it's just really exciting to me. Just speaking of how they empower the actors, extends to what we're talking about today, this idea of onboarding, which is to say that's kind of all you need in that situation because there's not any explicit promises being made other than here's this living town. There's a ton of stuff you can do and it's entirely up to you. All it takes is asking a question. So in that sense, there's no booklet for you to get. There's no kind of like, do this, and this, because really so much of it is improvisational. And the fact that they have given that freedom while structurally supporting the ability to do these multi-tiered sort of quest type things, it's a really unique and special thing. And it's just one of those things, it just works. It's just intuitive. You go there because it's like, look, because it is drop in and drop out, you're not obligated to do anything, which is great because you feel like, oh, if you want to stay here all day, you're absolutely welcome to do that. You'll understand when those break moments are, when some characters leave and they need to take their break, and because the actors can't, be on deck the whole day.
Right.
But there's this ebb and flow that just becomes very, very kind of natural to that experience. And I can only imagine it becoming an even more intense thing because obviously, like some of the other experiences we're about to talk about, these things are both part of a larger theme park, but not necessarily large enough to require an added ticket. Starcruiser is its own thing. You buy your ticket for that separately. But Ghost Town Alive just comes with your Knott's admission. And so there is a level of expectation setting, which is, well, I mean, I'm not really paying for it. It's just here. I can do as much or as little as I want. But there are other experiences where the interactivity is gated behind potentially even a small additional purchase that allows you to experience the spaces in a different way.
What I find fascinating about Ghost Town Alive is, you think about the emotional connection we have with Captain Keevan, Wraith Cole, Lenka Mock, all these characters on Galactic Starcruiser. We love these characters, but no matter how many times we go to Galactic Starcruiser, we're still seeing the same 2 days in that character's lives. Whereas Ghost Town Alive, actually the story evolves from season to season, year after year. The story kind of builds on itself, which I think is a really kind of a fascinating component that's different than Starcruiser. I mean, that's why people love, take the mayor. They love the mayor of Ghost Town Alive. They love it. And seeing him every, year is such a special moment for all these people. He's back, and they get another different connection with this character, an expansion of that character's story. Whereas, when we see Wraith Cole, we love seeing Wraith Cole. But it's going to be the same kind of 2 day, of that character's life, where Ghost Town Alive kind of just expands the canvas, which is interesting.
Right. It is an interesting distinction because there's a balance to it, which is, what you're describing is this idea of persistent storytelling, which is something that I'm very interested in. And the idea of creating storytelling systems that allow for persistence that continues while you're not there. It's very compelling. Obviously, it's ported over from the video game world. Now, that being said, the Ghost Town Alive version of that is not purely what you're describing because, yes, seasonally, it does progress, meaning they will reference things that happened last year. That being said, within a season, technically speaking, every time you visit is Founders Day.
Okay.
It's always Founders Day in Calico. They are very tongue in cheek about it, and they have allowed their performers the freedom to remember guests who do come back multiple times. So even though technically speaking, it is always Founders Day, the level of the familiarity can grow over the course of a season. So it's a unique way to balance it because, when you design these things, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, because sometimes I'll make a suggestion like this and someone will say, oh, you want us to throw away all? No, not necessarily. This idea of it can always be Founders Day, but how we treat that is, look, yes, it is always Founders Day, but throughout the course of the season, we're learning more about all the things that happened that day. And, with that many people walking around, that's that many opportunities to say, oh, this was also going on. We just never knew it until this version of that day, you know? And certainly that's how I think they've been thinking about particularly Galaxy's Edge, which is to say, Galaxy's Edge is the same day every time you visit it, technically. But, the idea that there are so many simultaneous adventures happening on that day, that onion is infinite. You can keep peeling back layers of that onion and discovering new facets of it. And that's before you even get to the idea of, in air quotes, story bubbles. But the less said about the story bubbles, the better.
It just seems like it would be such a challenge. On Starcruiser, you're in such a confined space, and there's only so many places you can go on the ship. Where I'm picturing Ghost Town Alive, people just kind of wandering aimlessly, and so trying to manage the story while you're managing people, people that you've been talking to for, a few minutes, a few hours, and now new people coming on. Like, that's just extremely impressive that the actors can keep everybody involved and not, kind of lose themselves as to where they're even at in the story, depending on, the time of day.
Thankfully, unlike Starcruiser, it's a lot less plot than it is story. And thankfully, it has all those wonderful Western tropes that everyone is familiar with to hang their hat on. So it's more about the story exists only to be an excuse for people to interact with each other. And so you'll anyone can fill you in. Oh, what happened? Oh, they threw Mayfields in jail again. Oh, okay. Well, whatever. It's just another, because it's a living, breathing thing, less than a show, even though there are certain moments you could compare to a show, but it's much more about, look, there's just this churning world, step into it, have fun any way you can. And when you're not having fun anymore, go ride a roller coaster. It's an elegant kind of way to do it because it adjusts to your level of interest.
What's really fascinating, to build on what Nick just said, is that the drop-in, drop-out aspect is with Galactic Starcruiser, the cost of admission is significantly higher than a day's admission to Knott's. Especially if you lived in the area, in the Southern California area, you could go to Knott's Berry Farm every weekend if you wanted, and kind of peel away this onion as much as you wanted. And we live in Arizona, we'd have to drive a couple hours, but we could go to Knott's Berry Farm, a couple times a year, whereas Starcruiser is definitely more of a rare thing to be able to experience.
Once every 7 months, Martin.
Yes,
We're
that's
definitely on a clock here. Yeah,
I was going to say, purely theoretically speaking.
But it is kind of interesting that they've kind of framed it. There is a lot of content there that the repeatability, repeat visits can experience something completely different time and time again. And again, that's due to the performers. Really, just the performers just bring so much to that experience,
right?
Every time.
And to wrap it back to the idea of onboarding and bringing people into the story and setting expectations and marketing, think of something as elegant as a name. Ghost Town Alive tells you exactly what that thing is. Meaning the Ghost Town comes alive. We're going to make the Ghost Town come alive. And the way we do that is these characters.
Right.
But it does what it says on the tin. And as fun of a name as Star Wars Galactic Starcruiser is, it doesn't tell you a damn thing about what the thing is. Other than it's a cruise and it's structured like a cruise.
Right.
But that, in terms of the actual heart of it, it's but then again, what does Galaxy's Edge tell you about Star Wars other than this is the outskirts? It gives you that aspect, but the idea that it is still to many the Star Wars land, that it's they're always going to have this duality, and Disney, for better and worse, the last 10, 20 years has really struggled with naming things. And the bigger your company gets, the harder that is, because there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And certainly all the things we're talking about in terms of marketing and onboarding, some of that in terms of how it touches the experience, the Imagineers can touch. But my heart goes out to them because the marketing departments are really separate departments, right? Like they are going to do what they're going to do with Starcruiser. And it's been a roller coaster that I thought was over, but when I saw that ad about sit back and relax and enjoy your Star Wars story, I thought this roller coaster will never end as long as Starcruiser exists. Yeah,
right.
Star Wars alive.
Right. Yeah.
Well, speaking of things that are hard to name, Christine, I think you have experience with the last one on the list that we wanted to talk with Nick about and how they onboard folks.
Yeah, so we just recently were in Las Vegas and we went to Omega Mart, which is a Meow Wolf production. We know we've got a couple more, in different states and whatnot. But yeah, we had no idea what we were walking into. I mean, it looked like an Omega Mart. But there's almost no interaction with anybody as you're going through. So explain a little bit, because I'm doing a really poor job. So explain a little bit about Omega Mart and the Meow Wolf kind of idea behind what they're doing.
Meow Wolf is a fascinating example because to a certain degree, they kind of fell backwards into the interactivity by dint of being a physical space. Their first installation was in Santa Fe called the House of Eternal Return. And it is what Meow Wolf is all about, which is to say it is a artist's collective. And so it is a amalgamation of all these different artistic installation pieces that are loosely tied together through the structure that they're being put into. And later that one was given a story, but it certainly didn't start with one. And they kind of built an app that you could interact with for that one, not dissimilar from the Datapad, but that was not designed for that. And so when these new ones opened, particularly Omega Mart, they were kind of designed from the ground up to be interactive and to have kind of a narrative layer for you to unlock through your interaction with preserving the structure of the others, meaning they get local artists wherever they go to do these installations, which is a beautiful thing. And as a great shock and delight for all of us who are theme park fans, all the artists are credited. You can find out the name of all the artists. Disney leaves us to feel like absolute weirdos figuring out the names of the Imagineers who made out the things that we like. But it is truly artist-focused, artist-owned, And it's a wonderful model that I hope inspires others. I'm particularly excited to see who will the next Meow Wolf be, because they've been doing such wonderful things. And Omega Mart is delightful. The interactivity is a little shaky in the sense that sometimes it's not working, and they don't even particularly advertise that as the core of that experience, because they are in the business of the art, world. And so for most people visiting a Meow Wolf installation, it's about the vibrance. They wouldn't call themselves an Instagram palace necessarily, because it's so much more than that. But the idea of being in a bright, colorful, extremely creative environment, being able to take pictures and enjoy yourself and explore the physical space, that's the core of it. And, I drove out for the opening of Omega Mart, particularly to deal with the interactive aspect, and it was not turned on that day. And they said, well, we don't even really advertise that,
Wow.
like that. They were having some technical difficulties, and I completely understand. The new one in Denver, which I guess is about 13 months old now, the Convergence Station. That's the one that I just visited. Only was able to spend a few hours in there, but it's such a wonderful expression of the idea. Maybe my favorite, because it is themed to a transit station, a multiversal transit station. And it really is just the right fit of a concept with kind of what they do. And the interactivity and the story you can experience there is a bit less linear than the one in Vegas, which is a delightful way to approach it, because look, it's a physical space. You can kind of boop your little card in any order you want. So why not, have the narrative design of it kind of match that kind of freewheeling, open, node-based structure we talk about when we talk about Starcruiser. So, Meow Wolf, when we talk about onboarding, you're right. There's not a lot, because it's like they truly want to preserve a level of discoverability, and maybe don't even want to forward it as the core thing of what they do. But isn't it neat that we do this thing? And they're surrealists. They're pitching a surreal experience. So they would never want you to think there is a coherent narrative that everyone must get from it. Because it's like, no. Hopefully the narrative you experience is as surreal as the space you're in. But you look at the marketing, most of it is in universe, particularly for Omega Mart and Convergence Station. And the billboards I've seen for them, they're just jokes. They're just a little joke in the universe to get your mind in the space that you would need to be. And so in that sense, it's more about, look, we're inviting you into our world. So let's make the tone of this marketing commensurate with that, so that the kind of sense of humor that will be required to really get the satirical edge of what we're doing here.
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating, to say the least. It was beautiful, absolutely. But I probably spent the first, hour and a half or more going, what am I supposed to do? Like, I got my little card, and like you said, similar to Starcruiser, you kind of go around and you scan, and they're giving you little pieces as you're going through, little videos to watch. It's a Circle K type market, and you're supposed to be there to apply for a job. And as you're going through and doing different things to apply for this job, you're finding out a backstory about the owner of Omega Mart and her daughter, and kind of their life and how Omega Mart came to be. And again, visually absolutely stunning, but it was a little frustrating at one point, where it was like, I really want to understand, and I just can't.
Well, what's interesting is that, when we call it like an onboarding, they do frame it. They're onboarding you as a new employee.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I mean, that to me is the structure of how they handle it. I thought was fascinating. I liked the fact that they didn't handhold me in any capacity. And they do actually. You do watch other people, progressing around you, and you can see. I don't want to ruin the experience for folks that haven't been, but there are a lot of secret doors. There are a lot of different passageways. There's a lot of otherworldly things happening around you. And so you can see, immediately, that person's doing something that's wildly unusual for, someone by a freezer in a grocery store. And you want to get to that. And that there's something there, but I liked the fact that they did not handheld you, but they guided you just enough to get from station to station, and every station kind of peels back a different layer. And I did think it was hilarious that you could actually purchase all of these ridiculous items they had for sale. The avocado that you zip and it's like a little wallet or purse, thing that a zillion different, countless items that were just ridiculous, but still for sale.
Right.
But to me, I yes, it was confusing, but I think that the feeling, especially as you progressed to the second act of Omega Mart, there was a feeling of I don't want to say dread. That makes it not sound fun, but it was a sense of really otherworldliness happening around you, that they kind of kept you you really felt there was something mysterious, there was something really alien, unusual happening, and it was a really pervasive sense to me. I was having fun the whole time, but there was a real sense of a presence, a feeling, and it was very intentional. The storytelling really.
No, and it brings to mind another, because the way you primarily engage with what you're talking about is through these boop cards that we've been talking about scanning, and it brings to mind a part of Starcruiser that is the other side of the coin from onboarding, which is offboarding. And the elegant thing that I think those boop cards do, and another way that they function, in addition to being able to unlock all this stuff, that I wish there was an equivalent in Starcruiser, was to say, there's a lot to watch, there's a lot to read that you unlock in these experiences, particularly at Meow Wolf. And the boop card is your way of accessing it once you get home. And so that persistence of story that says, okay, there's a lot to read. I don't need to read it all right now because I know what I need to do next already. The idea of the takeaway, the take home. And sadly, as we've all bemoaned before, your data pad is erased daily. So it's not even just that at the end of the experience, they're all gone. Your comms from day one are gone on day two. So it's one of those things where I think they might have and I understand there are probably technical reasons that needs to happen, or it would have been an additional expense that wasn't worth it in order to make it possible to keep all those things. But it does feel a little like a betrayal to not be able to have those things and take them home with you, and to not have the record of who you talked to, what you did, what choices you made. And I hope that there is something to that level, because it really is wonderful that Meow Wolf gives you the opportunity to kind of dig through your history once you get home by scanning the QR code on that boop card.
So what lessons did Starcruiser learn from its predecessors? These, not just the experiences with what they did at Legends Frontierland and some of the other things we've talked about, but what do you think they learned from some of these other experiences we've been talking about?
That's a tough question, because, there's the experience, and then there's, as we've been saying, this other thing. There's this marketing, this PR, the onboarding. And to a certain degree, obviously, I'm sure they collaborate, but it feels from the outside to be very siloed off and separate. And I will say, just personally, doesn't bring me any joy to say it, Disney doesn't really learn very well from anybody other than themselves.
That's true.
It feels a little bit like a walled-off garden. And sometimes you can get a little high on your own supply and think, well, we've been doing this for 60 years. We know how to do it. But that being said, when the conversation has gotten out of control to the level that it has, I would hope that there was a humbling that occurred with at least the initial assumptions of how they would do it, because it's an extremely difficult challenge, and my heart goes out to them. This criticism is not levied because I think this is an easy thing to do. It is literally the hardest thing to do, which is to sell something that's never been sold before, and also to know what strategy you should take in doing that from a narrative perspective, because it is a narrative experience. And the question of which side do we explain? Do we explain the functionality, or do we explain the narrative? Let's just take, for example, the commercials, particularly, because they were very slickly produced, particularly the ones that came out right before, Starcruiser, and all the ones that they've been regurgitating for all the recent TV spots. Very well produced. Some of the creatives that worked on those TV spots are now getting their own movies and TV series and things. So, that traditional pipeline of like music videos where Ridley Scott was making commercials before he made films. That tradition is alive and well today.
That's good.
But, slickly produced. But from a narrative perspective, they chose a very strange middle ground with those commercials, which is to say, we are going to make it physically what the experience is. We're going to shoot it in the place. We're not going to build necessarily a bunch of extravagant sets that build out a Halcyon you're not visiting. We're going to use, let's say Kylo Ren ignites his lightsaber. We're not going to composite a blade onto it. We're going to show you what it vaguely looks like. And honest to God, the saber in the experience looks better than the one in the commercial. So they might have shot themselves in the foot there.
Yep.
But so they made that choice, but they decided to say, okay, we're going to do that. We're going to use the space. We're going to use the actual performers. We're going to shoot it as it is in the space, but we're going to arrange it in configurations that actually never happen on the ship. So like I said, with Kylo Ren igniting his lightsaber, the shot in the commercial is him down in the atrium, pointing it right at the camera. And as we know, that never occurs. That's not something that physically happens in the space, but they decided to make it inspired by. That is to say, what is the feeling of this thing without going fully into the realm of, we're just going to make it look like a Star Wars movie, in which case you would not shoot it this way either. They chose that middle way, which is to say, try and make it true to the essence of it, using the pieces but reassembling them in a new way. And that's an interesting way to do it, but certainly it's not the foregone conclusion, which is to say, I would almost wonder, what would a Starcruiser marketing campaign look like that said, that's interesting, but we're going to go a different way, which is to say, take Wraith Cole, take Gaia, take Captain Kevin, take Lenka Mock. What are they doing in the days leading up to Starcruiser? And give us that one character introduction moment that you can't give in theater, which is to say, the great challenge of screenwriting is, how do you introduce your characters? Mm-hmm. One of my favorite examples, Jack Sparrow in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie. His ship is sinking, and he steps off of that sinking ship onto the port just casually as anything, just another step on his adventure, his misadventure. And I think just about everything you need to know before he opens his mouth, what the state of this guy's life is. So I think the opportunity of having one highly cinematic 30-second introduction to each character would have been a very interesting, Wraith getting the call, learning the Hyananea is on the ship. Mm-hmm. Something doesn't have to be that spoilerific, but something in that line. You don't even have to say what it is. It could just be him getting a holo message that says, we found out where it is. It's on the Halcyon Starcruiser. What can you do to get on that ship? Mm-hmm. And then he goes and calls Gaia and says, Gaia, we're going on a cruise. Something like that.
Yeah.
To that level. I think of the hotly contested trailer for Rise of the Resistance, where Vi Marati is the hologram rather than Rey, right? And I still kind of wish it was Vi Marati in the ride, but setting aside that desire entirely, the trailer is incredible for getting you into the universe right leading up to what the experience of that ride is going to be. And I do think there is something that could have been done more in the universe, more in the tone of what a Star Wars film would be. And you could do the exact opposite, right? You could make it more in the vein of a Ghost Town Alive type thing. And they have some of that in the current commercial. They have some of the shenanigans. But it shows you people having fun. It doesn't show you how they started having fun. Mm-hmm. It doesn't show you how they got into it. They're in the heat of it and it's fun. It's like, oh, that seems interesting. But I would say a much more man on the floor, just kind of like, what does it actually authentically 100% feel like, really? Like out of you, it doesn't have to be strict, because everything obviously in Starcruiser is in universe. But what I'm saying is from the perspective of the guest, what is that boarding the ship, this, that, and the other? And they just, the current, at least the commercials that I have assiduously collected in my little archive, they've been a half and half type thing. Whereas it's like, I do feel like, that's a different feeling, right? Like the idea of what does it actually feel like? People are having to go to the influencers to get that. They're having to go to the bloggers and the vloggers to figure out, okay, what does it actually feel like? And thankfully, at least the people I've talked to, once they've seen that, they've said, oh, I get it. I get what this is now. I understand. And certainly you can never film something perfectly, any theatrical production. You have to be in the room to truly experience it. But seeing kind of the ripples of excitement that go through the discoveries of how you can engage with it, that I think is something you could build a campaign around for sure. So I'm sorry I got so far afield from your question,
No,
which is
no,
how
no,
did
no.
Disney, how did Disney learn from these other experiences? And truthfully, they didn't. And I hope that they can, because there is a level of humility that comes with saying, yeah, this is unlike anything else, but where there is precedent, what can we pull, right?
Well, and just like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator character, they're a learning computer, so they are progressing forward, which is good. So.
That's right.
Nick,
that's right.
You said something fascinating to me that I do think the more recent marketing for Starcruiser it's effective in a way, but you raise a really interesting point that if they give a 30-second spot where 20 seconds of it is just introducing Wraith Cole, getting this information, setting up who this is, and having the payoff of that 30-second spot, him touching the shoulder of a guest and saying, "And I need your help."
Right. Right. And I think there was an attempt at that, which was to say, if you go back and watch the announcement trailer for Starcruiser, which is a little further away than what we're talking about, there was an attempt to focus on the interactivity, but in a very vague way because the experience wasn't done yet. And there is this shot of a Vimerati-esque resistance fighter, but not Vimerati handing someone a data pad.
Yep.
And that to me was the emotionality of it, but not in the expression that actually matches what the experience exactly is. So it does seem like that feeling was there, right? Like we're not saying anything they didn't think of.
Sure.
We're not solving this issue for them, but it is, just thinking through what may have been the thought process behind that. Obviously, they were swimming in all of these waters. It's just like, particularly when a department is that big and with that many cooks in the kitchen, it can probably be hard to know exactly what the right course of action is. And the initial announcement at the conventions when the Imagineers Anne Morrow came up and as the project lead kind of described what it was. She's the nicest person you'll ever meet. But, the tonality of that kind of explanation to some people can turn them off a little bit. It can feel a little corporate. It can feel a little too much like the rest of Disney, when truthfully, this is not anything like the rest of Disney, right? Like they're describing it in the same way they would describe the opening of Mickey's Runaway Railway. Yeah. It's just, but it's fundamentally not that.
So now we're almost 8 months into it. Do you think that Disney is possibly still confused or hasn't gathered enough information yet to know exactly who their audience is? Is that part of the challenge?
I would suspect they know more about who their audience is now than they ever have because they've been running it. Look, think about it. Isn't it crazy to think about every 2 days?
Yep.
There's like almost 300 people doing this thing, right? And so they've got the data. Absolutely. It's just simply a question of, look, we don't from the outside have any of the numbers. They have all the numbers. They know the information. We don't. But, they are now able to make certain decisions about it, which is to say, once this machine is going and that initial publicity is kind of done, you probably can leave it to the churning of social media and the word of mouth and that kind of thing, because they know what numbers they need to hit and we don't. Certainly the fan sites don't. So every doomsday post you ever see about Starcruiser, that's just, a guess. We don't know what capacity this thing needs to hit. And we certainly don't even know how they calculate capacity. It doesn't seem to be based by cabin. It's more about head count. Mm-hmm. And we don't know what that head count needs to be. Certainly it's not anything near what people think it is. And I would say, if you go on a cruise that's a little bit lighter and other guests, doesn't that sound kind of nice?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm expressing to people. Yeah. I'd love to go on a Star Cruiser that had a slightly lower capacity, just more FaceTime with the characters.
Right.
But it is fascinating to see at least some of the outside observations that these sites are making. The idea of that accordion can expand and contract, and they've designed it to expand and contract to look, if they don't have to do a second dinner service, they won't.
Right.
And isn't that fascinating? I mean, that it's that limber to be able to do it. Yep. And it makes sense that it is, because it has to be that limber. And so I think they've built a very robust system that can expand and contract as they need it to. And the implications of that for marketing are more, strategic. What where do they need to be with this? Who do they need to reach? And to me, the greatest indication has just been, like I said, that updated, the newest sort of social media TV spots that they've been putting out, trying to reach more than just us. more than just the diehard participants. Because truthfully, if you set the expectations properly, it's absolutely a thrilling experience for somebody who doesn't want to participate. And I have a friend who I know who I've debated hotly about interactivity in theme parks, and he's against it, but he's going in February. And he will be the perfect case study for that kind of thing, because he does not want to talk to the characters. He wants to enjoy the space. He wants to enjoy the design. He's a huge Disney Parks fan. And it's funny because I was having this conversation with him in Galaxy's Edge, and I spotted Ray. And I said, oh, come take a holo scan of me and Ray, won't you? But then once that holo scan was done, Ray walked right up to him and asked his name, shook his hand, and I said, you've just had your practice run for Starcruiser.
That's great.
That's awesome.
You know what, though? I've said enough about my ideas. I'm kind of curious. Do you all have any feelings about onboarding or pre-arrival stuff that fans could do before they get on Starcruiser? I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, one of the things that I think that Disney really could benefit from is there's that moment that people have seen the security video in the security right before they get on the shuttle. That's the moment to me that where they need, if you ride, for instance, soaring over, California, or now it's soaring over the world. There's that beautiful onboarding video by Patrick Warburton that kind of just sets up this. They need just a short 3-minute in-universe setting up. Here's what the Halcyon is. Here's what it's been through over the past couple decades, and here's what's been happening in the universe over the past 30 days. A lot of people really don't understand. You can tell them it's between episodes, 7 and 8, or I'm sorry, it's between 8 and 9, but they don't understand specifically. Hosnian Prime was days ago. All these things happen, and quickly in universe set the stage for what they're about to walk into. Lenka Mock just beat up a space pirate 30 days ago. Let's kind of set the stage. This thing's been in dry dock because they got attacked. That's a cool thing. So to me, something that I wish someone would produce, someone like us, a fan movie of just where's the universe at? Something that they could someone would theoretically watch after they've seen the security video before they get on the shuttle. Just some 3-minute in-universe thing. Maybe that'll exist before the end of the year.
Well, so that's a video that talks about the history of what's happened before we enter the story. So previously on, that kind of
basically,
But
previously on the Halcyon.
Right, exactly.
That's great. That's great.
But even before that, when we're in the hallway, so when people get on the Starcruiser, you first go through real world security to make sure that nothing's coming on that shouldn't. But you're in that long hallway where there's plenty of spaces for screens to be on the wall. And let's go out of universe, and it could be someone in a Starcruiser Blue or whatever.
Boy, that's interesting.
That basically says you're about to enter, and they're talking to us as not our characters. They're talking to us as Nick, Martin, and Christine and Drew. I had to name our names carefully because I was going to do it wrong. But if they had something that said you're about to enter an interactive experience where you're encouraged to talk with the characters, to follow people around,
scan everything.
When you see these, and they show people scanning in, so they kind of tee it up for folks, so that for that poor couple, so that maybe they have a little bit more of a chance to I don't know to get on the ski lift or the ski jump and head on down.
I think that's brilliant. I mean, truly, because that's a simple, again, not even in universe, just simply showing. It's no different than when you're on Star Tours. They show people how to get buckle in. They've got that beautiful video of how to exist in this experience. Well, they should do that exact same thing. That's a fantastic idea, and that's the perfect place to do it.
Yeah, because especially on that, when we talk about the function of the structure, that is a lot more helpful for people who don't even know that's a question that they should ask, right? The story stuff, I like the idea, particularly of what you're saying about it being a fan film, because that's inherently opt-in. Like, I think all of the stuff we've been talking about in terms of the story, some people don't want to know anything going in. And look, you could absolutely have a great time with that, as we all have, going in, not necessarily having access to any information, but, you can make things available to people now easier than you ever could, because look, we're all going to the website anyway.
Right.
To look up
Right.
information about when things are available, look at the calendar, that kind of thing. The ability of having subpages that look, it doesn't display automatically. You have to click through to opt into wanting some of that information.
Right.
And it's a difficult question, but I just love your idea of this, previously on the Halcyon, because it's like, yeah, there is some interesting sort of stuff, right? Like I did have a small, I wasn't thinking of a video, but one of my million hobby projects that has not been finished yet was particularly gearing up for that second Starcruiser trip. And right after, I had this idea. I actually started coding this little one-page site that would have asked you your age, and it would have then automatically populated this expanding tile list of, okay, this year is 34 BBY. You were born based on your age.
Oh,
you
that's
were born.
clever.
So
Ooh.
it would calculate when you were born, what was happening when you were born, what type of events would have affected your parents, potentially your grandparents, and also how old were you when other galactic events occurred, right?
Nice.
Just if you want to build the character, right? Because look, the actors in the cast are so good. You don't need to have it, but I liked having it. It's fun to have those points of reference for those that do. I mean, obviously, look, not everyone wants to do math, and that was kind of the idea of the website is have a little page that would allow you to do that. And so eventually I will finish that. And I still own the URL visitbatu.com.
Nice.
So I need to do something with that.
Sure.
That eventually I think that's what will live there.
I've already said this in a previous episode, so I'll keep it short. But what Nick just said to me, when we were trying to really figure out who our characters were for Voyage 2, that's the single item that really helped me figure out who this Jorg's a cool character was. I did exactly what you mentioned. Is I laid out a timeline, and I said, okay, here's all the major events in this 40-year span of history. And I did it for Christine. You saw it, and we were able to chart. Okay, here's where Jorg Sakul was born. Here's where Mali Facent was born. Zoran Vox was born. When I was 10 years old, here's what was happening in the universe.
Right.
When I was 20, here's what was happening in the universe. And that, more than anything else, put me in the space of really being that character existing, as a perpetual character in that universe, as a real existing entity in that universe. I had a history then in that universe. It wasn't just Jorg Sakul existing in that moment. It was, here's where I've been for all of this time. And it was really easy for me to kind of chart story points then for my, my character in that. But yeah, boy, Nick, that would be I would love to see that site exist.
Particularly for the large moments that are galaxy-wide, like Halcyon, like just having people ask themselves when they're building their characters, where were you when the Halcyon cataclysm occurred? I mean, that's the modern equivalent of where everyone remembers where they were when 9/11 happened, or where the previous when JFK got shot. There's these things that galvanize us, and that is true in Star Wars as well. And so even if it doesn't come up, because look, I've said it before, but I didn't use any of that in Starcruiser. It never came up. I was so actively talking to the performers in the cast about what was happening right now, that it was more of an internal thing. It was more about me having that basis of knowing where I was coming from, that, yes, if it did come up, it would be fun to surface that information. But even if you don't surface it, that preparation gets you into a mindset going in. And that, I mean, this actually wraps directly into what we're talking about, which is that's pure onboarding is character creation. And they don't want people to feel like they have to create a character. But for people that do, having some official resource like that would not be unwelcome in terms of this is the state of the galaxy.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's marvelous.
Yep.
And if they don't want to create characters and they just walk in and they bought the cruise as a present for their husband, if there was something there that could tell them a little bit more, here's what you're about to see and here's what you're about to do. It's not just a show that's going to happen around you. It's something that you can be a part of. That would be just. I wish they could do something like that.
Yeah.
Nick, that would be such an easy resource for Disney to actually create, just a character kind of. I don't want to say character generator. That's too broad.
Sure.
But that's
they have one of the new TV spot social media ads. The whole copy for it is, who are you in this universe? And it ends with maybe the worst Star Wars name generator I've ever seen.
Oh, nice. Okay.
But it explicitly ends with that.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's like, look, honestly, if that's the level they're going to go, maybe they shouldn't be doing it. But it's more of a dipping your toe into it for people who wouldn't even think of it that way.
Sure.
So I think they are thinking on that level. At least marketing is thinking on that level.
Yeah.
I would be very curious what department they pulled that list of names from, though.
Well, and along with Drew, you mentioned this video that could be in the hallway. I'm kind of thinking to myself, an opportunity for them to do something is outside when everyone's queued up and waiting. I mean, you could be there for up to 2 hours. They let people start lining up at 11. You don't start going into 1. There should be something. I don't know what. Let's quick chat. If there was a screen going on outside the queue line, what would be beneficial to see at that point as someone standing in that line?
Excellent question.
Yeah, I mean, except that, I could be there for 20 minutes, I could be there for 4. So that's you might...
Well, yeah, there's the question of what's playing on a screen, or you have nothing playing on a screen and you're pointing people to something on their data pad. Because I think you're already having people set that up with Play Disney Parks and all of the kind of logistical information.
That's true.
But kind of once they're done with that, if you did have something, now obviously my mind first goes back to the wonderful HoloNet news that they used to have on StarWars.com. Yeah. Like the idea of reviving HoloNet news specifically for Starcruiser based things would just be an amazing resource. There was a digital edition, but there was also a print edition they used to put in Star Wars Insider, which I just loved. And I've retroactively gone back and made sure I had all those issues with the in-universe HoloNet news, which was from the prequel era. The idea of in-universe news articles written about, who is this Count Dooku? What are the separatists? What's he really about? What would the people on the ground be saying about the figureheads of the galaxy? And I think it would be wonderful to have a HoloNet news equivalent for a Starcruiser.
Oh yeah, that's really cool. And maybe that's kind of where you were going, Martin. If they had interviews with Captain Kevin playing.
Yeah. The cruise, Disney cruises have onboard channels. They have the video thing where they do the video announcement every morning, right? From wherever they do it from. But, that would not be, uncomplimentary to the theme that they've chosen.
Well, I'm even thinking about the reel that they have waiting for the Indiana Jones ride.
Oh,
it's depending on how long you're in that queue, you may see that, the same, 2 or 3 different, short films over and over and over again. But
sadly much shorter now.
Yeah,
I know.
The old ones were great. Yeah.
I know. But
no longer John Rhys Davies. Small little factoid there. He was replaced by an impersonator, the voice in that. And when he came and visited a couple of years ago, he didn't realize it wasn't him.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's how good a job the guy did.
That's a huge compliment. Yeah.
That's my very favorite Disney ride anywhere, the Indiana Jones Adventure. Yeah. That is my number. If I had gun to my head, pick favorite one, that's it. And boy,
it's probably mostly because of the queue.
It is. The queue is and when that ride opened, and it opened in '95, boy, the lines were the thing broke down so constantly. I mean, we were there opening day, and
nothing has changed.
Nothing has changed. But we were in that queue for hours upon hours upon hours upon hours. The room where you're in, where the Sala video is playing. Right. My God, you could have sent us mail to that room, and we would have received it. We were there for so long.
Yeah.
But I so loved that long form video. It was a 10 minutes, but it was long.
It used to be a lot longer.
6 or 7 minute video, and boy, we were actually able to get an unbroken video take when everyone was there for so long that we filmed it where everyone was quiet. It took forever for everyone to stop talking because we were there for oh my God, an hour and a half in that one room. But we were able to get an unbroken, beautiful shot of the whole original video.
This will be for the Patreon. All the Indiana Jones content is for Patreon subscribers.
Right. Yes, exactly.
But that's the thing that I think that would really work is that, that video that they have, it moves the story along a bit. It gives you a little precursor as to why they were there doing the dig. But then it also tells you when you get in the Jeep, make sure you put your seatbelt on, and things like that. So it's all in universe, but it still gives you an idea of what happened before you got there and what you need to do whenever you get on the ride.
But if there's no line, you don't need to see it.
Right.
Well, and just to wrap that up, because you guys made me remember my favorite ride, put a gun to my head, it was the old Jaws ride at Universal Studios Orlando.
Oh, yes. My wife as well. That's her favorite attraction.
Excellent. So she probably, did you go on that a lot back in the day, Nick?
I have never experienced the Jaws ride. It sadly demised before my Florida years.
I gotcha.
But it still exists on this earth, so I might still have a chance.
Japan.
Well, I don't know if they have this in Japan. The Q video that played in the Jaws ride, and your wife will remember this, was WJWS. It was a morning show that was filmed in Amity, and it was as hokey and as cheesy as you can imagine. But I think it was 30 to 40 minutes long.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And it was a whole in-universe, we're here in Amity and we're sponsored by Captain Jake's Boat Tours and but it introduced you to, I'm not just in a Jaws ride, I'm coming to Amity where this battle shark Jaws devoured those helpless, innocent villagers 25 years ago. So something like that might be really interesting to play out front too.
And the modern equivalent that just came to mind as, who knows how great it functions as an onboarding thing, but certainly as a story thing, I was blown away because I didn't discover it till after. I was like, how did I miss this? I'm pretty plugged in. But when they opened the new Skull Island Reign of Kong attraction in Florida, they released 5 or 6 in-universe Travel Channel style documentaries about Skull Island it's wrapped in an alternate reality game. And I'm just sitting here being like, literally checks all of my boxes for something awesome. Like, how did I miss this? But they're all still up, so you can go watch them. But I was just like, I really like that attraction. And I'm so delighted that they found a way to frame it because the attraction takes place in the 1930s, but to have a version of it that touches the modern day it's just a great, wonderful framing device for them to market it in a creative, unique way. I was very impressed with that.
Yeah, so that to me answers a question. Now I was poo-pooing your idea, Martin, but if they were playing something like that outside,
I would eat that up. I would.
Yeah.
I mean, and
Knott's Berry Farm does this for this Not Scary Farm event. Now there are certain attractions where they would used to just play a video in the queue on a screen, but now they just post up a QR code and you can watch it on your phone whenever you want. Little in-universe queue video style things that you can enjoy once you get home as well. So it's definitely in the air, and I think it would just be such a delightful add-on to Starcruiser as the years go on, and maybe the budget has a little bit of room for something like that in it.
Yeah.
Boy, I mean, they could even repurpose some of that stuff for promo for Disney Plus. I mean, they should absolutely have a Galactic Starcruiser promo running on Disney Plus. I mean,
it's fascinating actually that you mentioned that. I didn't even think that they don't have one because they don't. And they had that whole. Do you remember that cheesy TV special they did for Galaxy's Edge with Keegan Michael Key and or it was Neil Patrick Harris? I think
it's on Disney Plus now.
Yeah, right. And it really isn't a version of that for it. And maybe they're just waiting a little bit to do something like that. But, it definitely harkens back to the old world of Disney type thing. Because we've been talking purely in universe because, of course, we're 4 giant nerds. But there is the out of universe version of this, which is like, what if you did an old, like, I love watching the classic Disneyland TV show where Walt is sitting in a set of his own office, and he says, well, tonight we're going to be watching The Jungle Book. And let me tell you all about, he takes the book off the shelf and it's like, what if, I know it's not totally within the tone of what they do now because they really don't tend to forward the Imagineers. But what if you did have Scott Trowbridge in a suit sitting in a little office saying, well, the Halcyon's been around for 250 years. And he's he's like he's in the Jedi library, like there's glowing books all around him. And he's like, something, I mean, because it doesn't have to be so dire. Like we can have it be a little out of universe, but I do think we are just in an age when, the type of behind the scenes content that they approve is very anesthetized, and it's not necessarily the most fun stuff that you've ever seen. So that's for another era. And, God willing, Starcruiser is just the beginning of this type of embodied experience that you can go on. And I'd like to think that once they feel Starcruiser is well in hand, I'm sure they're already dreaming of the next dream, and who knows what that'll be and how they will market that based on what they've learned from Starcruiser,
Yep.
And we will all be there for it.
Oh, no question. Knocking down the door on opening day.
Yes.
ready to break something accidentally.
Well, thanks again to Nick Tierce for joining us for this episode. Wow. Another amazing conversation. That I can listen to that guy read the phone book.
Yeah, always.
A to Z.
Yeah, but he would find a way to make you go, well, what letter comes next?
Yes.
So that's just so much fun to listen to. If you'd like to listen to Nick's latest project, again, you can find it online at hollowmedium.com. It's an audio drama that's a 1920s era ghost story. It's got found audio, not found footage. It's fabulous, super creative, and I know you'll enjoy it. If people wanted to find us on the web, where would they do that at, Christine?
They can always find us at Heroes of the Halcyon on Instagram, Halcyon_Heroes on Twitter. You can always email us at heroesofthehalcyon@gmail.com. And don't forget, Heroes of the Halcyon on YouTube.
Well, it's always fun to shoot the poodoo with all the Starcruiser superfans out there. So until next episode, it's our honor. Let's raise our glasses with the Halcyon toast.
Stabilite!